the country where the Buddha grew up. The hero of our story is Prince Siddhartha, the Buddha-to-be, who lived more than 2,500 years ago. His father was the Rajah of the Sakya clan, King Suddhodana, and his mother was Queen Maha Maya. They lived in India, in a city called Kapilavatthu, in the foothills of the Himalayas. The city of Kapilavatthu. Siddhartha's parents belonged to the Indian warrior caste. They lived in a great palace in their capital city of Kapilavatthu, beneath the majestic mountains of the Himalayas. Queen Maha Maya was beautiful, intelligent and good. King Suddhodana was honored and respected because he ruled well. Both of them were admired and loved by the people they ruled. Queen Maha Maya and King Suddhodana. After many years, Queen Maha Maya became pregnant. She and her husband were very happy about it. On the full moon day in the month of May, she gave birth to a boy in Lumbini Park, while she was on her way to see her parents. 5 days after the prince's birth, the king asked 5 wise men to select a name for his son. They named him Siddhartha. This name means the one whose wishes will be fulfilled. The death of Queen Maha Maya. There had been much rejoicing at the birth of the prince, but 2 days after he was named, Queen Maha Maya died. Everybody was shocked and felt very sad. But the saddest person was, of course, her husband King Suddhodana. He was worried, too, because his wise advisors had predicted that if the prince saw someone old, someone sick, a dead person, and a monk, he would want to leave the palace and become a monk himself, instead of being a prince. Prajapati Gautami takes care of the baby prince. The queen's sister Prajapati Gautami took care of the baby prince with as much love as if he were her own son. Prince Siddhartha was a healthy and happy boy. He liked to learn and found it easy to study, and was the cleverest in his class and the best at games. He was always considerate to others and was popular among his friends. The prince's loving kindness. The prince was kind to everyone. He was gentle with his horse and other animals. Because he was a prince, his life was very easy, and he could have chosen to ignore the problems of others. But he felt sympathy for others. He knew that all creatures, including people, animals and all other living beings, like to be happy and don't like suffering and pain. The prince protects a snake. Siddhartha always took care not to do anything harmful to any creature. He liked to help others. For example, one day the prince saw one of the town boys beating a snake with a stick. He immediately stopped the boy and told him not to hurt the snake. Rescuing a swan shot by Devadatta. One day, Siddhartha was playing with his friends in the palace garden. One of the boys was his cousin, Prince Devadatta. While Siddhartha was gentle and kind, Devadatta was by nature cruel and liked to kill other creatures. While they were playing, Devadatta shot a swan with his bow and arrow. It was badly wounded. But Siddhartha took care of the swan until its wounds healed. When the swan was well again, he let it go free. The plowing ceremony. Siddhartha liked to watch what was happening and think about different things. One afternoon his father took him to the annual plowing festival. The king started the ceremony by driving the first pair of beautifully decorated bullocks. Siddhartha sat down under a rose apple tree and watched everyone. He noticed that while people were happily enjoying themselves, the bullocks had to work terribly hard and plow the field. They did not look happy at all. Seeing the nature of life. Then Siddhartha noticed various other creatures around him. He saw a lizard eating ants. But soon a snake came, caught the lizard and ate it. Then, suddenly a bird came down from the sky, picked up the snake and so it was eaten also. Siddhartha realized that all these creatures might think that they were happy for a while, but that they ended up suffering. Siddhartha is found meditating. Siddhartha thought deeply about what he saw around him. He learned that although he was happy, there was a lot of suffering in life. So he felt deep sympathy for all creatures. When the king and the maids noticed that the prince was not among the crowd, they went to look for him. They were surprised to find the prince sitting with legs crossed, in deep meditation. The king gives Siddhartha a palace. The king did not want his son to think about deep things in life too much, because he remembered that the wise men had predicted that his son might one day want to leave the palace and become a monk. So, in order to distract him, the king built Siddhartha a beautiful palace, with a lovely garden to play in. But this did not stop the prince from thinking about the suffering and unhappiness that he noticed around him. Siddhartha's bride, Princess Yasodhara. Siddhartha grew up to be a handsome young man of great strength. He was now of an age to get married. To stop Siddhartha from thinking of leaving home, King Suddhodana arranged for him to be married to his own beautiful cousin, Princess Yasodhara. The horse taming contest. Following the ancient tradition, Siddhartha had to prove how brave he was to be worthy of Yasodhara. In the presence of her parents, he was asked to tame a wild horse. Siddhartha tamed the horse not by beating it, as some suitors might, but by talking to the horse to calm it and stroking it gently. Yasodhara wanted to marry the prince, and no one else. They were married in a great ceremony. Both were only 16 years old. The Pleasure Palace. To stop the prince from thinking about unhappiness or leaving home, King Suddhodana built a pleasure palace for Siddhartha and Yasodhara. Dancers and singers were asked to entertain them, and only healthy and young people were allowed into the palace and the palace garden. The king did not want Siddhartha to know that everybody gets sick, grows old and will die. But in spite of the king's efforts, the prince was not happy. He wanted to know what life was like for people who lived outside the palace walls. The four sights, old age. Finally, the king allowed Siddhartha to go on short visits to the nearby towns. He went with his attendant, Chana. On his first visit, Siddhartha saw a white-haired, wrinkled man dressed in rags. Such a sight surprised him, as he had never seen anyone old before. Chana explained to him that this man was old and that everyone will be old one day. Siddhartha felt frightened by that and asked Chana to take him back home. At night, he could not sleep and he kept on thinking about old age. The four sights, sickness. Although Siddhartha felt frightened by the vision of getting old, he wanted to see more of the world outside. On his next visit, he saw a man lying on the ground and moaning. Out of compassion, he rushed over to the man. Chana warned him that the man was sick and that everyone, even noble people like Siddhartha or the king, could get sick. The four sights, death. On the third visit, Siddhartha and Chana saw four men carrying another man on a stretcher. Chana told Siddhartha that the man was dead and was going to be cremated. He also said that no one can escape death and told the prince that everyone will die one day. When they returned to the palace, Siddhartha kept on thinking about what he had seen. Finally, he made a strong decision to find a way out of the suffering of old age, sickness and death. The four sights, a monk. Some time later, while the prince was riding in the garden, he saw a man in a yellow robe. He noticed that the man looked very peaceful and happy. Chana explained to him that the man was a monk. The monk had left his family and given up his desire for pleasures to search for freedom from worldly suffering. The prince felt inspired by the sight of the monk and began to want to leave home to search for freedom in the same way. That day, his wife gave birth to a lovely baby boy. Although he loved the boy, Siddhartha could not rejoice because he wanted to become a monk. He realized that now it would be more difficult for him to leave home. Turning away from the dancers. From the day when he decided that he wanted to leave the palace, the prince lost all interest in watching the dancing girls and other such pleasures. He kept on thinking instead about how to free himself and others from sickness, aging and death. Finally, he decided he had to leave the palace and his family and become a homeless monk in order to understand life and what caused suffering. Siddhartha leaves home. One night, when everyone in the palace was asleep, Siddhartha asked Channa to prepare his horse, Kantaka. In the meantime, he went into the room where Yasodhara and their newborn boy Rahula slept. He was filled with loving kindness towards them and promised himself that he would come back to see them. But first he had to understand why all creatures suffer and find out how they could escape from suffering. A last look at Kapilavatthu. In the silence of the night, Prince Siddhartha mounted Kantaka. Accompanied by Channa, he left the palace and the city of Kapilavatthu. They stopped at a river some distance from the city, and the prince took off his expensive dress and put on the robes of a monk. Then he told Channa to take the horse back to the palace. At first, both Channa and Kantaka refused to go back, but Siddhartha insisted that he had to go on alone. With tears rolling down his face, Kantaka watched as the prince walked out of sight. Living as a monk. So, at the age of 29, Siddhartha began the homeless life of a monk. From Kapilavatthu, he walked south to the city of Rajah, the capital of the Magadha country. The king of this country was named Bimbisara. The morning after Siddhartha arrived, he went to the city and obtained his meal for the day by begging compassion for an injured lamb. After his meal, Siddhartha decided to go to the mountains where many hermits, people who live alone, and sages, wise people, lived. On the way there, he came across a flock of sheep. Shepherds were driving the herd to Rajah to be sacrificed in a fire ceremony. One little lamb was injured. Out of compassion, Siddhartha picked up the lamb and followed the shepherds back to the city, stopping an animal sacrifice. In the city, the fire was burning on the altar, and King Bimbisara and a group of priests were chanting hymns. They all worshipped fire. When the leader of the fire worshippers lifted his sword to kill the first sheep, Siddhartha quickly stopped him. He asked the king not to let the worshippers destroy the lives of the poor animals. Then Siddhartha turned to the worshippers and told them, "Life is extremely precious. All living creatures want to live just like people. Whoever sows suffering reaps the same fruits." He continued, "If people expect mercy, they should show mercy. By the law of cause and effect, karma, those who kill others will, in turn, be killed. If we expect happiness in the future, we must not harm any creatures. Whoever sows suffering will reap the same fruits." This speech completely changed the king's mind, and the minds of the fire worshippers. He stopped the killing ceremony, and invited Siddhartha to stay and teach his people. But Siddhartha declined, as he had not yet found the truth he was seeking. Siddhartha with Alara Kalama. After Siddhartha left Rajah, he went to see a sage, wise person, named Alara Kalama. He stayed with the sage and studied diligently. Soon he knew as much as his teacher. But although he had learned how to make his mind very calm, he still did not know the way to freedom from all suffering. So he thanked Alara Kalama and left to find another teacher, in search of the truth. Siddhartha then studied with a sage named Adaka Ramaputta. He learned how to make his mind very still and empty of all thoughts and emotions. But he still did not understand the mystery of life and death, and did not find the complete freedom from suffering that he sought. Again, Siddhartha thanked his teacher and left. But, this time, he decided to find the ultimate truth by his own wisdom and effort, trying the ascetic practices. In those days, there were many wandering monks who belonged to various cults. They had left their families to become ascetics. They believed that by starving themselves or tormenting their bodies, asceticism, they would be reborn in heaven. Their belief was that the more they suffered in this life, the more pleasure they would receive in the future. So some ate extremely little food, some stood on one foot for a long time, and others slept on boards covered with sharp nails.